Well, thanks for joining us this morning. This morning the Cabinet has met and agreed with the recommendation from the Treasurer, supported by myself, that Michele Bullock be appointed as the 9th Reserve Bank Governor. Michele will be the first female governor since the independent RBA was founded in 1959. After close to 4 decades of service to the RBA, most recently as the Deputy Governor, Ms Bullock is eminently qualified to lead this national institution. Michele's will be an important job at an important time with the challenges that we face globally, challenges which I, of course, have been discussing at the NATO summit over recent days. This appointment follows a rigorous process, including consultation with the opposition. I also want to acknowledge Dr Lowe's 7 years of service to the nation, in particular his commitment to supporting Australian jobs, incomes and businesses during the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic and global economic downturn. It was indeed an extraordinary time, and we thank Dr Lowe for helping the Australian economy navigate those unprecedented challenges and, most recently, the global economic consequences of Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. Ms Bullock is an accomplished economist with wide experience at the RBA, including as Deputy Governor and Deputy Chair of the Payment Systems Board. The incoming Governor will oversee the implementation of the recommendations of the RBA review to make sure we have the most effective central bank and monetary policy framework as Australia and the world faces ongoing economic challenges. I very much congratulate Michele Bullock on this appointment, and I thank Jim for overseeing as Treasurer the process to ensure that we got at the right decision for Australia, and I'm confident that we've done just that.
Thanks very much, Prime Minister. We are really proud to be announcing that Michele Bullock will be the 9th Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. Her appointment will take effect from the 18th of September this year. This is a history-making appointment. Michele Bullock will become the first woman to ever lead the Reserve Bank in this country. Michele Bullock is the person best placed to take the Reserve Bank into the future. Michele is an outstanding economist, but also an accomplished and respected leader. Her appointment best combines experience and expertise with a fresh leadership perspective at the Reserve Bank as well. Now, this is the right call, but it's not an easy call, and I want to acknowledge that as well. This comes after months of deliberation and consultation, and we have come at this in the most methodical and considered way that we could. This is a big job. This is one of the most important appointments that we will make as a government, and so we have treated it methodically and in a considered and consultative way as well. I want to say, as the PM did, that we thank Phil Lowe for more than 4 decades of dedication and commitment and service, not just to the Reserve Bank and not just to the economy, but to our country as well. Phil Lowe goes with our respect, he goes with our gratitude, and he goes with dignity. And I want to make that clear. And on a personal level, I have really valued my working relationship with Phil. I've known Phil for a long time. He is, on a personal level, a terrific guy. And he has handled himself impeccably as we've gone through this process. And the statement that the Reserve Bank is releasing today and his comments is evidence of that. And I have conveyed to him directly, and I'm pleased to say to you as well that I have said to him this week that the way that he has carried himself has been characteristically kind and classy and much appreciated by the government. Now, obviously, an appointment of this magnitude, there is lots of speculation, and I think it's a good thing today that we can end the speculation about the next governor of the Reserve Bank. The decision was not taken until it was taken by the Cabinet collectively today, and that's important, but it has been my view for a while now that Michele Bullock is the best person to take the bank into the future. It is a wonderful appointment, I think, and we are really proud to announce it today. It's a history-making appointment, it's the right appointment, and it comes after lots of consultation.
Treasurer. Well, Phil.
To Treasurer, the decision sort of smacks of continuity, if you like, with just Bullock having the experience, as you said. Dr. Lowe wanted to do another term. Why wasn't he given another term? Was it because you didn't believe he was up to the reform task, or was it broader than that?
Well, first of all, of the 8 governors who have served to this point, 5 of them haven't had their term extended. So extending a governor's term has been, in historical terms, the exception rather than the rule. I think the average tenure for a Reserve Bank governor is a little under 8 years, and Phil brings up 7 years. And so it's not wildly out of the norm that Phil will finish up after 7 years. I think Michele Bullock is the best person to take the bank into the future. And Michele represents the best combination of that experience and expertise, but also a fresh leadership perspective. And one of the things that I have really admired about Michele Bullock as I've come to know her, and especially to understand her role and her contribution to the Reserve Bank review, is that Michele has thought deeply about how we take the bank forward into the future. She does have a lot of experience at the bank. She does have a lot of expertise as an economist. But one of the things I really value in this appointment is the style and nature of her leadership. She's an accomplished leader, a highly respected leader, and that's what we need at the bank to take it forward.
The RBA review said that the organisation needed a shake-up. Michele has been at the RBA for almost 40 years, as you alluded to. Do you still think that she's the right person to shake things up at the bank, and how is she going to do things differently?
Well, Michele Bullock has made it very clear to us that part of her role is to make sure that we can implement in the best possible way the recommendations of the Reserve Bank review. And so we've had a number of conversations about that, and I know that Michele Bullock's committed to the RBA review process, as am I, as you know, and there's a lot of work to do to agree the new statement of conduct this year and to introduce the legislation this year, ideally as well. And so I think the fact that Michele Bullock brings that experience and expertise, but also that heft and that gravitas, will actually be a really important asset when it comes to relationship with the various RBA boards, and when it comes to bedding down and implementing the review. I think she's got the best possible combination of attributes to help us do that.
Prime Minister, Peter Dutton made it clear yesterday that Jenny Wilkinson and Dr. Stephen Kennedy would not be his picks, that he found them objectionable. He said the decision was made this morning. How much did that factor into your decision today?
0.
Yeah.
Less than 0, it must be said. But Jim?
Look, I wasn't obligated to consult the opposition on this appointment, but I did it anyway. Not obligated under the old arrangements, not even obligated under the recommendations of the Reserve Bank review, but I thought it was important that I do that. And I thank Angus Taylor for making the time on a couple of occasions, including this week, to talk about this appointment. Now, I have been forming a view for some time about my recommendation to Cabinet, but this is a Cabinet decision, and the Prime Minister runs a Cabinet government, and so the decision wasn't taken until today. Now, when it comes to Peter Dutton is so relentlessly negative that he's even now bagging things that aren't happening, right? And this is bordering on the pathological when it comes to his negativity. And to describe people of the calibre of Stephen Kennedy and Jenny Wilkinson, who have advised both sides of politics in a frank and fearless and impeccable way, as somehow tainted, it's not those two that are tainted. You know, we won't be taking lectures about the public service from the party of robo-debt, for example. And so I say about Jenny Wilkinson and Stephen Kennedy, this is the best of all worlds. We get Michele Bullock at the Reserve Bank, and we get Stephen Kennedy at the Treasury, and we get Jenny Wilkinson at Finance, I couldn't have more respect for Kennedy and Wilkinson and Bullock. We've got those three in the key positions, and that's a really good outcome.
Can I make this point as well? With regard to the public service, one of the things that I want my government to be characterised is lifting up the respect for the public service, which is an honourable profession. For the Leader of the Opposition to be critical of people of the calibre of Stephen Kennedy, who, I remind people, was appointed as the head of Treasury not by the Albanese government but by our predecessors, and Jenny Wilkinson, who was the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury under the former government and was then appointed as the Secretary of the Department of Finance by mine, is, I think, completely reprehensible. And I just support the comments of the Treasurer in that when I heard about those comments, I just thought, is there anything that this bloke won't play politics with and won't be negative about?
Prime Minister. And Treasurer as well. The RBA review was highly critical of the Reserve Bank's insular culture. Did the appointment of an internal candidate as the Governor mean it's all the more likely that Ms Bullock's replacement as Deputy Governor will be an external candidate who hasn't worked within the Reserve Bank?
Well, we'll work closely with Michele Bullock, but also with the Treasury, and I'll consult widely again. We intend to fill the Deputy Governor position on the same time frame, so by the middle of September. And obviously what we'll try to do there is to make sure that we've got the best combination of talent and experience. I don't want to artificially limit the field by coming at the way that you've described it, but clearly what you want in the bank is you want, in addition to experience and expertise and heft and gravitas and the right kind of leadership attributes, you want to make sure you've got the right combination of technical attributes as well. And that will feed into our decision, but I don't want to artificially limit it now.
Many unions were a bit upset when Bullock said last month that she wanted unemployment to rise regarding inflation. Is that a concern, that response and that view of her at this point, and is that a contradiction of the Labor Party's platform for full employment?
I think that I note that there's a great deal of interest in the Labor Party's platform from people outside the Labor Party. The Labor Party platform is a public process that we go through. We'll have our national conference, unlike other political parties, we'll do it in a transparent and public way.
Just add to it on the first part of Sarah's question. The comments that Michele Bullock made in that speech, as I said at the time, just reflected what the Treasury expects and what the Reserve Bank expects, that as inflation moderates, we're both expecting to see a tick up in the unemployment rate. I think that's a relatively non-controversial point to make, and I said that at the time as well. And when it comes to full employment, you know, one of the key outcomes or recommendations out of this RBA review is that the bank obviously care about price stability, but also cares about full employment. They've actually got two objectives, and I think that's really important. And every time the Reserve Bank Board meets, and next year, after next year, the Monetary Policy Board of the Reserve Bank, they will weigh up those two considerations.
Treasurer, just on the Monetary Policy Committee, how soon do you think it will be operational? When do you start making appointments? And is that one of the key discussions you're going to have with Ms Bullock about the timing of given what Phil Lowe said this week about the change in the meeting schedule from next year?
Yeah, so when I released this RBA review, I said that our intention, consistent with the recommendations of the review itself, you know probably better than or as well as anyone, Shane, that the review itself recommended some timeframes, and we would like to hew as closely to those as we can, and that has the new arrangements coming in next year. There's legislative change required. We'd like to introduce legislation by the end of the year if we can. But this is absolutely central to the conversation I'll have with Michele Bullock when, in the lead up to and when she takes up this position. And we want to get the sequence right, and providing clarity on the Governor is the most important first thing. We'll now work closely with her and with others to work out the optimal way to implement the recommendations of the review.
Just here.
Yeah,
And then here.
so Treasurer, you mentioned a minute ago that it had been your view for a while now that Dr. Bullock would be the best candidate to be the next governor. Can you give us an indication about when that view formed? Was there a particular decision or way a communication was handled that made you feel that Dr. Lowe's time was up?
No, I've just become more sure about it over time. And I mean, you'd be familiar with the process. All the RBA watchers in this room would be familiar with the process. You think about it and you provided a short list of appointable candidates. Obviously we did think about Wilkinson and Kennedy and obviously Michele Bullock. And over time, I just became more convinced that we've got a really good opportunity here to appoint a first-class economist who also has remarkable leadership attributes. And so over time, I became more convinced that this was the right appointment. But I consulted genuinely as well. I consulted the business community, I consulted the union movement, I consulted a number of my colleagues, I consulted the opposition. And that's because in this government, and Anthony sets the tone here, we work through these big calls in a methodical and considered and consultative way as we can, and that's what we've done here.
Can I just pay tribute to this bloke and the way that it's been handled? Jim and I would have had, I don't know how many discussions about this to make sure that we got the right outcome. So I met with Dr. Bullock a while ago as well to satisfy myself that the direction that we're considering heading in, I obviously knew some of the other names that were around as well. And I am very confident that this has been got right and that Jim, as the Treasurer, has taken his responsibility seriously to make sure that it's been got right. And this is an example of what I want to characterise my government as, a government that's orderly, that's considered, that's thoughtful, that has the right processes in place, because if you have that, you'll get better outcomes. And this outcome is a very good one for the nation.
Thanks, Prime Minister, and to the Treasurer as well. Now that you've announced Michele Bullock as Governor, does the work start now on that legislation and the new statement on the conduct of monetary policy? And are you hopeful that you'll get that bipartisan support?
Well, the work has begun already. I mean, we've been working on the statement with the existing leadership at the Reserve Bank, but deliberately and for obvious reasons, we thought it best to conclude it after we make this appointment, and the same for the legislative part of it. And the second part of your question, Rachel?
Bipartisan support.
Oh, ideally, yeah. And I mean, I've said at every point, even before we released the review, and I think my actions have shown that I mean it. These are such important matters that will outlive any one government of any one political persuasion, and so ideally we would get bipartisan support. I mean, I can't imagine we won't now get support for the appointment of Governor, given the criteria that Peter Dutton laid out during the course of the week. So I expect their full-throated support for this appointment, frankly. But also I have been working constructively with Angus Taylor on the review itself. The best outcome from the country's point of view, not just from the government's point of view, is to get some bipartisanship around these key issues that will outlive the life of any one government of any one political persuasion.
Just take a couple more here.
Thanks, Prime Minister.
then,
Look,
yeah.
obviously the face of the Reserve Bank has changed, but to state the obvious, the economic outlook has not. So what is the message to Australians who might be hoping that removing Philip Lowe means interest rates will pause?
Well, first of all, the decision that we are announcing today is not about any one decision taken by the Reserve Bank Board or any one outcome over the last couple of years. This is genuinely about who is best placed to take the Reserve Bank forward into the future. But we know, the government knows, that Australians are under the pump right now. The primary focus of this government are the cost of living pressures that people confront. And we take responsibility for our part of easing the pressure on people, providing cost of living help without making this inflation challenge worse. And Governor Lowe, to his credit, has pointed out on a number of occasions that our budget is taking the pressure off inflation rather than adding to those inflationary pressures. That is our primary focus, the cost of living challenge that people face right now. At the same time, as we invest in the supply side of the economy and making it more productive and more competitive, so that we can grow into the future. We are anticipating a tricky combination of economic conditions over the next little while. The combination of higher interest rates and a slowing global economy will have implications for us. And one of the reasons it's so important that Governor Lowe and I go to meetings with our G20 counterparts next week in India is because we have an opportunity to represent Australia's interests but also make a contribution to how the world gets on top of this inflation challenge as well. It's still the primary challenge in our economies. It has consequences for all of us, and that's why it's the primary focus of the government.
It's been pointed out by economists that it is unusual to remove the RBA governor in the middle of a tightening cycle, or potentially disruptive. Do you consider extending Philip Lowe's term for even a short period of time just to get us through that tightening cycle?
Oh, I mean, to be clear about it, we considered Phil Lowe on a short list of appointable candidates. This idea that I think, backbench members of the opposition put around that this is unusual not to extend him, I mean, is frankly not right. Typically, Reserve Bank governors haven't been extended. The last couple have, but there's been 8 and 5 of them haven't been extended. So for all the reasons I said before, it's not particularly unusual. I think once we realised we had the right candidate, there's no point extending Governor Lowe if you've got the right candidate ready to go. And so we're appointing Michele Bullock from the 18th of September. And Phil Lowe goes with our thanks and our gratitude and with dignity.
The coalition's already saying the next governor's independence will be harmed by punishing Phil Lowe for tough but necessary rate rises. I know you won't agree with that characterisation, but do you want to respond to the concern that that's going to play on future decisions of the bank? Well,
I think like a lot of things that Peter Dutton and the others have said in the last few weeks, it's a bit ridiculous. Michele Bullock is fiercely independent, tremendously accomplished, and we cherish the Reserve Bank's independence. One of the reasons why we did the RBA review was because we wanted to strengthen the Reserve Bank and as part of that cherish its independence. You've all asked me questions over the last 14 months and invited me to second guess or preempt decisions taken independently by the Reserve Bank Board, and I haven't done that. That's because I do genuinely cherish its independence, and everything I do is about strengthening that, not diminishing it.
Thanks very much.
The Treasurer and the Prime Minister there confirming Michele Bullock will become the 9th Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. She will take up that position. The Deputy Governor currently will take up the leadership position in about 2 months' time from the 18th of September. And of course, confirming that Philip Lowe will not be extended in the term in that role. It is a safe appointment in many ways, sticking with the tradition over recent appointments of elevating the Deputy Governor into the leadership position. It of course comes with the added benefit of Michele Bullock being an outstanding economist and an outstanding leader, certainly in the view of the government. And that added benefit you heard both Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers refer to there of Michele Bullock becoming the first female to lead the Reserve Bank in its 62-year history. Not a word of criticism from either there of Philip Lowe. They were very careful there to only thank Dr. Lowe for his service to the economy and to the nation, particularly during the COVID pandemic when extraordinary measures were required. They paid tribute to Philip Lowe for the job that he's done over the past 7 years, and in particular for the friendship Jim Chalmers says that they have shared as well, working very closely together as Treasurers and Reserve Bank Governors so often do. So they're not wanting to criticise Philip Lowe or indeed the points of criticism that he has faced over lifting rates, over the guidance, the incorrect guidance that was given that rates would likely remain on hold until 2024 when they ultimately weren't. Plenty of criticism, though, it must be said, of Peter Dutton for his comments yesterday, the opposition leader, that the job should not go to the head of Treasury or the head of the Finance Department. The Prime Minister called those comments completely reprehensible, bordering on pathological, said the Treasurer. So they have suggested there this was completely out of line for Peter Dutton to suggest that Stephen Kennedy and Jenny Wilkinson were tainted in some way, unable to fill independently the role as Reserve Bank Governor. In the Treasurer's view, he's got the best of all worlds here. He keeps Stephen Kennedy at Treasury, Jenny Wilkinson at Finance, and now Michele Bullock as the new Reserve Bank Governor. Let's bring in our business editor, Ian Verinder, and business reporter, Sue Lannon, who's at the Reserve Bank. Ian, to you first. What do you make of this appointment, Michele Bullock as the Reserve Bank Governor?
Well, David, certainly the safe option. You know, she ticks the boxes when it comes to expertise and experience. There's no doubt that she's an excellent manager as well as being a great economist. And she also, most importantly, it has that aura of complete and utter independence. You not only have to be independent as a central banker, you have to be seen to be independent, and she certainly carries that. I guess if you want to point out a negative...
Thank you very much.
Just pointing out here, Ian, we're seeing some live pictures coming in for us just now of the Prime Minister and Treasurer meeting with Michele Bullock. That's in the Prime Minister's office right now. So we're just watching those live pictures, but carry on.
Australia as well.
Hang on, the Prime Minister is speaking.
Woman governor, but someone with your experience, with your knowledge and capacity. I'm just so confident that we've got this right. We've been talking it through. A number of conversations Jim and I have had in this room and others about this appointment. And I'm very pleased that where we've landed, and it is it's just very fortunate that someone of your experience and capacity is available.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an absolute honour, and I'm really happy that I've got such great support from the government, so thank you very much.
No, we're really pleased we can make this appointment, Michele. Congratulations, and thank you, as the Prime Minister said, for making yourself available. This is it's a history-making day, and as Anthony said, you know, we're really confident that what you bring to this role is going to be really important to take the Reserve Bank forward into the future. So thank you so much for agreeing to do it.
Thank you, and I think a big part of my role is going to be what you just mentioned, leading the bank through change, which is a very important part of the next year or so. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Thanks very much, mate.
Dale, can we Dale? Thanks. Oh, is this right? Thank you. That's it.
Nice to see everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Footy has more photos of me than my mum over the years.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, nothing too expansive there from the new or the incoming Reserve Bank Governor, beyond saying it's a big part of her role is going to be leading the bank into the change that we've heard them talk about there at the press conference, the changes recommended being implemented following the Reserve Bank review. Ian, just back to you. I mean, look, if anyone knows what they're getting in for when it comes to leading the Reserve Bank in a difficult time when inflation, the job's still not done in bringing down inflation, it is Michele Bullock. She would know the pressure that her colleague Philip Lowe has faced, and whether she will face scrutiny, pressure, criticism to the same degree, I suppose, depends on how she performs in the role. But she knows what she's getting into here.
Oh, undoubtedly. You know, interestingly, one of the reforms that was recommended by the review was greater openness, greater transparency from the Reserve Bank. And you'd have to say that Philip Lowe has actually driven that as an agenda from the day he got the job. And arguably, you could say that it was that openness and transparency in trying to urge people to get into the housing market that has led to his demise.
Well, it's a good point, because people might forget this, but he was more open, he gave more speeches, he did more publicly than his immediate predecessors.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there was a time not so long ago, 10, 15 years ago, when central bankers and the Reserve Bank governor rarely spoke at all. Maybe one speech a year, but there was a period, you know, around about the 2000s when they did not utter a word in public. So he has really, really changed that whole environment. But as I said, it's a two-edged sword, and it's led to his downfall.
Well, some of those comments that he made, you know, about the rental pressures and housing pressures, maybe people should take in or could take in a border, work more hours. Those are the sorts of comments that have landed him in a fair bit of hot water, haven't they?
Well, as soon as you start getting into government economic policy, you start to tread into very dangerous waters. You might recall that under the previous government, he was urging the government then to spend more because inflation actually wasn't running hard enough, wasn't running hot enough. And so he was urging the federal government to start spending on infrastructure, which was greatly resisted by that government.
So, Lana, let me bring you in here. It is an historic day, an historic appointment, as the Treasurer has said a few times there. But it is also a safe option in going with the Governor of the Reserve Bank. Has there been any immediate reaction to this announcement?
Well, it's too early at the moment, but we have heard from the Reserve Bank. They put out a press release. The Governor, Philip Lowe, said it was a first-rate appointment. And Michele Bullock, as we just heard there, saying she's honoured. She also said in the press release put out by the Reserve Bank that she's honoured to be appointed to this very important role. And the appointment, she says, comes at a very challenging time for the bank. But Michele Bullock also saying that she is committed to implementing the Reserve Bank review. Of course, this is a huge overhaul of the bank. It means that meetings go down from 11 meetings a year to 8 meetings a year. It means also that the Governor will be doing a press conference after each meeting. What has been criticised is the bank's communication strategy, and obviously Philip Lowe indicating that he thought it would be unlikely that interest rates would rise until 2024. A lot of people took on home loans as a result of that. And of course, the Reserve Bank had to start raising rates last May, because of very high inflation. We heard the Treasurer Jim Chalmers say that the legislation to go forward with this Reserve Bank review hopefully will be passed by the end of the year, but it is going to take some time. We're expecting there will be a separate monetary policy board that will be put in place to decide on interest rate decisions. So it will be a broader range of people on that board, including representatives of workers. We know Ian Ross, the former Fair Work Commission president, will be on the board. The current board is quite business focused, but the changes also bringing the Reserve Bank into line with other central banks. For example, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell does press conferences after each policy meeting to explain the decisions.
So you've got to say, listening to that comment in the press release from Philip Lowe, this is a first-class appointment, congratulating Michele Bullock. Whatever you think of Philip Lowe, and he's got plenty of critics for the reasons, the problems you just articulated there, he's handled himself with great dignity through all of this. We should also note that I think on Sunday, he and the Treasurer are due to be flying to India for a G20 finance and central bank leaders summit that's taking place in India. So despite now knowing with the confirmation out there that he's not going to be continued in the role, he wanted to be continued, but he's not going to be, he is showing a great deal of class here, isn't he?
Yeah, he certainly is. And in fact, we heard Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, describe Mr. Lowe as kind and classy. As you said, he's worked through this whole process. The review was released a few months ago. And since then, just this week, we heard the Reserve Bank and Mr. Lowe announcing the changes that they had accepted from the review, including the number of meetings each year to go from 11 to 8. A press conference being held by the Governor after each meeting as well. So he's well regarded internationally, and he certainly steered the Reserve Bank through this process. And personally, it would have been very, very difficult for him. He's come under immense scrutiny. It's very rare for people to know the name of the Reserve Bank Governor, but because of the steep rise in interest rates, a lot of people know him, and unfortunately a lot of the public don't like him.
No, he's certainly copped it and become a household name. Look, those new arrangements, Ian, the advent of this monetary policy board, bringing in more monetary policy expertise to decisions on interest rates, that won't happen until next year, and it may not be until another 12 months from now, till July next year. In the meantime, I guess a lot of households and businesses will be very focused on what this change is going to mean for the coming months. Is there anything to suggest we're going to see a different course of events on interest rates over the coming months, given this change?
David, the short answer is no. What this means to interest rates is really absolutely nothing. I don't think there's been any criticism of the fact that the Reserve Bank has actually raised interest rates. Every central bank around the world in every developed nation has raised interest rates, many of them at a far greater pace than Australia has. And there are reasons why we've lagged in terms of the rate hikes. I mean, America's up around 5. New Zealand is way above where we are. The UK and the European central banks both putting through double hikes just recently. So these changes will not affect monetary policy whatsoever. I guess from a positive point of view, we're at or near the peak in interest rates right now. We might have one more to go, but you'd have to say Michele Bullock will probably not face the kind of public criticism that Philip Lowe has. But she was the Deputy Governor during this whole period, and she has presided with Philip Lowe over these interest rate hikes. So
it's not a bad time to be taking the role, and if we're near the top or at the top of the rate rising cycle, and it's smoother sailing from here. But Ian, just on Michele Bullock, because interest rates aren't the only thing the Reserve Bank does. It's certainly the most public thing it does. But Michele Bullock, yes, she sat around that board table making those decisions with the rest of the board, but she has also spent a fair bit of time involved in all the other things the Reserve Bank does. Just remind us what they are and what that experience will mean for the new governor.
Well, the Reserve Bank actually undertakes a whole range of different strategies and mechanisms, all designed to control the economy and all designed to ultimately influence interest rates. So interest rate decisions are the most public thing they do. They also intervene in markets. You saw, particularly during the pandemic, they didn't want to, but they went down the path of quantitative easing, which is essentially money printing. They've been involved they've expanded their role in terms of research, in terms of trying to just, muscle their way through economic changes in the economy over the past few years through their statements. But generally speaking, they control monetary policy. And over the past 40, 50 years, what we've done is step away from governments running the economy and handing it over to the central bank in terms of monetary policy.
Ian, look, we're yet to see, as Sue points out, much reaction from the markets and so on. What would you expect given this announcement today? There was a lot of expectation that Philip Lowe would not be extended, but with the decision to go with the deputy, Michele Bullock, how do you think the markets will react?
I don't think there'll be much reaction. This was, hugely anticipated, and I don't think the markets have really given a bad mark to Philip Lowe for what he's done. I mean, in a lot of respects, there's been a lot of economists out there, and particularly bank economists, arguing that the Reserve Bank of Australia hasn't raised interest rates enough. So for all the criticism of the interest rate hikes, a lot of people in the financial markets have been arguing that they should have been much tougher and much harder.
All right, Ian, Sue, just stay with us. I want to bring in Phil Curry, the political editor at the Australian Financial Review. Phil, thanks for joining us. Look, we've described this as, yes, historic, but also a safe appointment going with the Deputy Governor. How do you see it?
Yeah, very much that, David. Safe change. It's a big deal to change horses. Your central bank governor in the middle of an inflation crisis, and this decision. One of the reasons underpinning it was very much as not to spook the markets or the business community, to accentuate continuity.
Change with continuity.
Yeah, well, I think as Dr. Chalmers said in that press conference, in a none too subtle fashion, I don't think they regarded as Dr. Lowe as having the wherewithal to implement the reforms of the bank.
I mean, they didn't want to criticise him at all.
No,
but that was the clear impression.
But he kept stressing with Ms. Bullock leadership attributes, which has been a criticism of Dr.
Implementing
Lowe.
These changes.
Yeah, and being able to bring the team with you and stuff. Stressing very much no change. Well, they don't anticipate any change in the approach to monetary policy. It's not the government's business to tell the bank what to do.
Do you think this will, however, be seen in some part as a reflection on, two things, the guidance that rates wouldn't move and then the rapid increase that we've seen over the last 14 months?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, that's how it's being perceived, especially by the opposition. They're saying Lowe is being scapegoated.
their claim is the government hasn't done enough with fiscal policy to get pressure down on interest rates, so they're blaming Phil Lowe. Look, we've probably not seen a Reserve Bank governor politicised like we have with Phil Lowe. He's become an object of derision on talkback radio.
Cameras out the front of his house.
This sort of thing. We've not seen, Glenn Stevens got one or two backhanders in his time, but nothing like we've seen. So it's hard to sort of ignore that there's not a political element to this, that the bank needs a bit of a change of face, just a refresh. And I think Michele Bullock ticks all the boxes. She's the first female governor, she's a new face, but she's experienced. It's not going to rattle the markets. And as Dr. Chalmers said, he did give serious consideration to both Stephen Kennedy, the Treasury Secretary, and the Finance Secretary, Jenny Wilkinson, but they actually it suits him and the government to have them where they are.
Best of all worlds, he said.
Best of all, they are both very good at what they do and very valuable to what's coming down the pipeline in terms of the economy. So,
just over the politics of the last 24 hours is interesting as well. Now, the PM was asked what Peter Dutton said yesterday about those other two candidates influenced the decision. He said it had less than zero impact on the decision. However, they've taken the opportunity there, both the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, to really give Peter Dutton a whack for saying what he said yesterday. These guys were tainted in some way from being able to serve in this role.
Well, it was a pretty extraordinary outburst, wasn't it? I mean, where Peter Dutton was coming from, he wasn't actually saying they were pro-Labor or pro-Liberal. He says that if you come from that echelon of the public service where you've been working in close partnership with Treasurers, Liberal and Labor, then there's a perception you can be tainted. And right now the independence of the Reserve Bank is paramount. Now, his comments were, I guess, drawn from experience with Bernie Fraser, who came from the Treasury, and I think at one stage Paul Keating claimed, Fraser does what I tell him to do. So I guess, that was the genesis of what Dutton was saying, but there was a fairly overt political message there too.
Yeah, but these
they were going to politicise this if it were Jenny Wilkinson.
But look, a couple of things. Stephen Kennedy was appointed by coalition to lead the Treasury. Jenny Wilkinson was at Treasury doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes work, putting together the COVID response under the Morrison.
And they're both regarded. And
a lot of these people, like Jenny Wilkinson, do spend their career. She spent 10 years at the Reserve Bank, Treasury, Finance. The idea that they're somehow tainted and unable to serve in that role.
Or they're incapable of acting objectively in an RBA position. I think, it's unfair to both of them. And, Bernie Fraser, you may have your hang-ups about Bernie Fraser and his relationship with Keating, but I think to project that onto either Stephen Kennedy or Jenny Wilkinson was pretty unfair. But this was made clear to Jim Chalmers, Angus Taylor said it to him when in the last week or so when they were consulting, and he said we won't accept it, either Jenny or whoever. But that, having said that, I don't think. Well, I'm pretty confident it didn't affect the decision anyhow.
No. Now, in terms of the government's ownership now of the Reserve Bank's leadership, we know for the last year and a bit the Albanese government, every time rates have gone up, has said, it's the independent Reserve Bank. It ain't our fault, it's the independent Reserve Bank. Does that change now? Do you think that they've decided to replace Philip Lowe with Michele Bullock?
Well, it shouldn't, but there will be a spectre. There will be a spectre there that the public doesn't have the depth of understanding, the general public, that those of us who do this for a living, about how it all works and the separation between the bank and the government and stuff. And I think one of the journalists at the press conference from SBS just asked the question: can the public now expect a change in rate policy? Can they expect an end to these increases? And so it's only natural that there's going to be some sort of perception that Lowe has been gotten rid of because of not so much just the poor guidance he gave, by saying that the record low cash rate until 2024, that somehow the government has dumped him because of that, and the government's going to have to counter that perception. That's on them. They've made the decision to change horses midstream, so they'll have to fight that perception, and it will take hold, I suspect.
Well, it might get a little easier from here. We're just discussing with Ian Verinder if the inflation dragon has been tamed largely, and we don't have to see further rate rises, or mini rate rises.
Yeah. That's why I was suspicious. I thought they may have just extended Dr. Lowe through to Christmas or something just to see through this, one or two extra rises, and then the new person gets to sort of go downhill. But
And your thoughts on Philip Lowe, because mentioning earlier the dignity that he's shown through all the stuff that he's copped over the last year and beyond. Not only that, he's off to the G20 with Jim Chalmers.
Frosty old plane ride.
Could be an awkward few moments. But whatever you think of him, plenty of people will have a view that he's got a lot of things wrong. he's shown a fair degree of class.
Oh yeah, look, thorough, dignified always has been Dr. Lowe. He's a gentle sort of fellow, a kind and gentle sort of fellow. Yep. He's not an aggressive type. Look, he's a professional. He's known for a while he wasn't going to get it, I suspect. Yep. And as I understand, about 2 weeks ago, this was basically communicated to him. So, look, he's a professional. He won't be destitute. I'm sure there'll be a good career awaiting him, and I think the government's done it as well as they can do it in terms of not dumping on him on the way out. So
just a final one for you, Phil, on the politics of all of this. This decision doesn't come along very often. It's a big call for a treasurer to make and for the government to endorse, the cabinet to endorse. Has he got it right?
Oh, Dave, I don't know. Ask the experts, ask the economists and the markets. But look, there's nothing wrong with Michele Bullock, right? I mean, she's eminently suited to the job and will be an excellent governor. Has Phil Lowe been badly treated? I think
there'll be debate about that.
There'll be debate about that, but I don't know. I can't give you an honest answer, a personal answer on that. But I think
he's approached it. Carefully, diligently, all of those things, the consultations, the opposition.
Look, personally, I thought Lowe should have been extended for a little while until we're through this current crisis. But I'm not treasurer and I'm not accountable for the decision. So
we do thank you for joining us with your analysis today, Phil Curry from the Financial Review. Thank you. I want to go to Sue Lannon because, Sue, there's a bit of market reaction coming through now. What is it?
Action at the moment, the ASX 200 index up about 0.4%, so it's just trimmed some of its gains. We are seeing the big banks higher. Now, we did hear from National Australian Bank currency strategists. They're saying that this is continuity, so what they're expecting is a cautious approach to future interest rate rises. Now, the Australian dollar has come off today's high. It slipped a little bit. It's down about 1/10 of a percentage point, buying 68.8 US cents. But I do have to stress that it's been rising over the past couple of days because of the prospect of the US Federal Reserve starting to pause soon. So the US dollar has really slumped. So that's what's really driving the Australian dollar. So it's down a little bit since the announcement was made, but very little market reaction, David.
We're hearing, Sue, is unrelated to the big moment for the Reserve Bank today, but we can hear that going in the background there in Martin Place. Yes. Ian, look, just to you, one point that the Treasurer made was that he wanted to end the speculation. This speculation has been running for months. How important is that for the Reserve Bank to be able to put a full stop on that, get on with this transition and embark on what are going to be some big changes in how the central bank operates?
Yeah, look, I think that speculation's been pretty unfair, to be honest, to Philip Lowe. I mean, he is a person who's dedicated his entire life to public service and to trying to do the best for the country and the community. And so it has been left to run way too long, I think, and particularly the speculation around his future, where he's going to go. He's made it very public that he wanted to remain in the role. And so this is, in a lot of ways, quite a slap in the face for him. I think Michele Bullock will be able to implement those changes. And I think, Philip Lowe would have been able to implement them as well, really. And, both Philip Lowe and Michele Bullock have worked very closely together for a very long period of time. So, as I said, if you really wanted to put forth the picture of being an agent of change, you possibly should have brought somebody in from outside. So those changes that have been recommended by the review won't have really much impact on monetary policy or on interest rate decisions. They're still going to be made in a very professional way. And if the economy is running too hot, interest rates will rise. If the economy slows down, interest rates will be cut. That's the way it works.
Well, Ian Verinder, Sue Lannon, appreciate you joining us with the initial thoughts on this announcement today. Appreciate that. We'll hear more from you, no doubt, throughout the day and the coming days. We're getting a little bit of market reaction there, as we heard from Sue Lannon, but there'll be plenty more throughout the day as well. We're going to, no doubt, hear from the opposition as well. Presumably, Peter Dutton would be happy that they haven't gone with one of those senior public servants that he suggested would be tainted in the role, too close to government. But we have also seen some criticism from Peter Dutton this morning that Philip Lowe, in his view, is being scapegoated by the government. However, it is a change now at the top of the Reserve Bank, with Michele Bullock to become the new governor. From the 18th of September, she will take on that role. I want to bring in Stephen Hamilton. Professor Hamilton is a former Treasury economist and a professor of economics now at the George Washington University. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of this decision?
G'day, David. I think it's an outstanding decision. It's kind of surprising, to be honest. I was thinking it might be Stephen Kennedy. So I think at the end of the day, they've gone with a sort of continuity approach, right? They could have taken someone from outside, someone like Stephen Kennedy or Jenny Wilkinson, to kind of shake things up, given the review findings, or they could have gone with someone from the inside to get a new governor, right, that can implement change but isn't going to scare the horses. And I think given the period we find ourselves in, with a very kind of uncertain economic environment, I think that approach is the right one. So I can't fault the decision at all.
Why did you think it might be Stephen Kennedy? Because of the need to bring in an outsider to deal with the sort of cultural issues the review identified?
I think that's right. I mean, the question, I mean, the review is pretty dramatic. So you hear a lot of comments about the review from people who've never read it. But if you read the review, you'll see it's extremely critical, right? So there is some pretty dramatic stuff in there about the need for fundamental change at the bank. And I do think you have to question whether somebody who has been a part of that culture for 40 years is the right person to bring a kind of fresh approach and to change things, right? So I think that's a legitimate question. I also think there was a bit of poetry in, the Treasurer appointing his Treasury Secretary to the RBA governor, given Keating did the same thing in the early 90s. But anyway, I think...
And given Jim Chalmers is a big fan of Paul Keating.
Yes, right. You wouldn't be surprised if he wanted to emulate his hero. But at the end of the day, I think he did the right thing. I think this is clearly, if I had to pick of the three main contenders, this is the one I would have chosen.
And what about not continuing Philip Lowe? You don't sound surprised at all that they've decided not to extend him in the role.
Yeah, this is the main story here, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's not personal. It's not about whether you like Philip Lowe, whether Philip Lowe's a nice guy, whether he's professional. The question is performance. And performing as the Reserve Bank governor is about a lot more than just forecasting the economy or sort of economic theory or anything like that. It's about being the manager of a large organisation. It's about communicating effectively with the public. It's about making the right strategic decisions, right? So Philip Lowe is a genius, right? He has a PhD from MIT. Everybody who knows him says he's the smartest guy in the room. But evidently, and the review has been, implicitly pretty clear about this, the management of the RBA over the past decade has not been up to scratch. And what the RBA needs most now is fresh management, somebody to take the RBA in the direction that the review lay out. And so to me, the change is clear.
Just quickly on that point, where you say the management has not been up to scratch, are you talking there about the decision's well-publicised problems with the guidance on keeping rates low, or are you talking about the internal issues the review identifies?
All of the above.
Right.
What it isn't about is raising interest rates. Right? Raising interest rates is the right thing to do. It's what we need. The issues with RBA's management go back well before the pandemic, right? And they're well laid out in the review, and they're systemic, right? It's not just one thing or another thing. When you put it together, it's a pretty dramatic, I think, mismanagement of a really important institution. And it was critical that the government sort of laid down that kind of thing isn't acceptable. And here we are.
Stephen, stay with us. I want to bring in Danielle Wood as well, the CEO of the Grattan Institute. Thank you for joining us. I guess there's two big things here, not extending Philip Lowe and deciding on Michele Bullock, the deputy, as the new governor. Danielle, what do you make of both of these decisions?
Look, I think neither were surprising decisions. I think Philip Lowe, things were always going to be challenging for him after the review came out and pointed to the need for, some fairly sizable changes both in the bank's decision-making structures but also culture. And certainly I think the view was that he wasn't necessarily enthusiastic or on board for those changes. So when the government decided that was the direction they were heading, I think it was always going to be challenging for him. Look, I agree with Stephen's point. It would be very unfortunate, though, if it was in any way a reflection of the very difficult decisions the bank has had to make over the past year, and we certainly don't want to be in a world where Reserve Bank governors are not getting reappointed because they've had to make hard decisions. Why do I think Michele Bullock was a logical choice? I think she does bring both the best aspects of the continuity, the deep knowledge of monetary policy, understanding of the institution, but with an attitude that I think is quite enthusiastic about the changes that are coming, and certainly I've heard it suggested that she's quite open and will be a good person to take those changes forward.
And just on those changes, I mean, we talk about what it means in terms of 8 meetings a year instead of 11, press conferences after each meeting, a new monetary policy board to make the decision on interest rates. But when we talk about the cultural issues that were identified in the review, Danielle, just explain to viewers what we're talking about there. Is it not listening enough to the feedback of staff on certain issues?
Yeah, so what the review really pointed to was quite an insular culture. So first of all, we've known for a long time, Reserve Bank doesn't bring in many external people. So people will tend to stay there for their whole career. So that can create a sort of environment of groupthink or, people not sort of getting challenged on their thinking. The second point was, as you say, where there was that diversity of staff views, whether that was getting put in front of the board and the decision makers. And there was a suggestion that there was only one view that was making it onto the boardroom table. I think it's worth saying that Philip Lowe disputes that version of events, but certainly that's something that the review picked up on.
Look, most households, business owners will be wondering, big news at the Reserve Bank, will anything change in terms of the approach to bringing down inflation? Stephen, to getting it down within that target zone, that's still going to be the task. Keeping unemployment as low as possible is still going to be the task as well. Are we going to see much change, do you think, in the approach over the coming months and years?
Nothing, certainly this year, nothing at all will change. It's going to be 100% the existing strategy, which is, reasonably aggressive rate increases, determination to get inflation down. And what we've seen recently, which I think is welcome, is a serious communication that the RBA means business about inflation. We see inflation softening in the US, with really promising signs of lower core inflation. They've broken the back of inflation, albeit with interest rates, one and a bit % higher than where they are in Australia. So I think interest rates could go higher in Australia, but I think, so far so good. I'm a lot more optimistic now than I was, say, 3 months ago.
What about some of the other messages that Philip Lowe, particularly over recent months, was pretty keen to give every time Danielle, that he was speaking in a public forum? He would make the point about the need to get productivity going, particularly with wages increasing, a lack of productivity he really highlighted as a problem. You would think that's going to be a consistent view and approach from Michele Bullock as governor, to call out where governments do need to do better without necessarily getting too specific with their advice to government.
Look, I think absolutely, and I don't think there's probably an economist in the country that wouldn't tell you that it's important to get productivity going. It is not, a lever that the Reserve Bank controls directly, but it does very much impact their capacity to do their job and to sort of smooth the business cycle over time. So yes, I expect that we will see continued commentary on that, probably from Michele. I think the challenge for the bank, though, is they're not experts on sort of microeconomic reforms and productivity reforms in the economy. So it can get a little dangerous when they start to go beyond those headline observations, which are very valid, into the specifics if they haven't done the work and it's not the area where they actually have the skills and expertise. Well, you do, Danielle. You've done lots of work on this question of productivity and what governments can be doing to help the Reserve Bank bring down inflation. On a day like this, it's not a bad opportunity to remind people what you think are the few things the government could be doing that it's not doing to make the job of the Reserve Bank and its new governor a little easier. There is a huge list of things. We're talking a lot about housing at the moment, and rents, we know, a contributor to inflation. Trying to boost housing supply, working with the state governments to actually deal with, really restrictive planning laws that make it hard to add supply is really important one. We have a whole list of really important education reforms that would make a huge difference to long-run productivity, getting our skills performing better. There is a very long list of things. The Productivity Commission put out a 1,000-page document on this just a few months ago. There is no shortage of things that governments could do that will make a difference both in the short and the long term.
Just before I let you go, final comment from you, Stephen Hamilton. Should Australians feel comfortable, relaxed about what's been announced today?
Well, they shouldn't, in the sense that they were hoping for interest rates to be dropped dramatically. So I think the economic outlook that we faced this morning is the same one we'll face this afternoon. I think the government has selected the person with the greatest credibility to fulfil their task, and I think it's an excellent job done by the Treasurer.
All right, Stephen Hamilton and Danielle Wood, really good to talk to both of you. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, well, the soon-to-be outgoing Reserve Bank Governor has issued a statement on the appointment of his successor, Philip Lowe, saying, "The Treasurer has made a first-rate appointment. I congratulate Michele on being appointed Governor. The Reserve Bank is in very good hands as it deals with the current inflation challenge and implementing the recommendations of the review of the Reserve Bank. I wish Michele all the best." And in announcing the decision, the Treasurer was keen to pay tribute to Philip Lowe, particularly during the last period of intense media speculation.
We thank Phil Lowe for more than 4 decades of dedication and commitment and service, not just to the Reserve Bank and not just to the economy, but to our country as well. Phil Lowe goes with our respect, he goes with our gratitude, and he goes with dignity. And I want to make that clear. And on a personal level, I have really valued my working relationship with Phil. I've known Phil for a long time. He is, on a personal level, a terrific guy. And he has handled himself impeccably as we've gone through this process. And the statement that the Reserve Bank is releasing today and his comments is evidence of that. And I have conveyed to him directly, and I'm pleased to say to you as well, that I have said to him this week that the way that he has carried himself has been characteristically kind and classy and much appreciated by the government. Now, obviously, an appointment of this magnitude, there is lots of speculation, and I think it's a good thing today that we can end the speculation about the next Governor of the Reserve Bank. The decision was not taken until it was taken by the Cabinet collectively today, and that's important. But it has been my view for a while now that Michele Bullock is the best person to take the bank into the future.
And both the Prime Minister and Treasurer stressed the decision was made this morning. Of course, it comes after the fairly extraordinary intervention by Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, yesterday, where he criticised the prospect of either the Treasury Secretary or the Finance Secretary being given the position of Reserve Bank Governor. What impact did that position from Peter Dutton have on this final consideration? Take a look.
Zero.
Yeah.
Less than zero, it must be said. But Jim?
Look, I wasn't obligated to consult the opposition on this appointment, but I did it anyway. Not obligated under the old arrangements, not even obligated under the recommendations of the Reserve Bank review, but I thought it was important that I do that. And I thank Angus Taylor for making the time on a couple of occasions, including this week, to talk about this appointment. Now, I have been forming a view for some time about my recommendation to Cabinet. This is a Cabinet decision, and the Prime Minister runs a Cabinet government, and so the decision wasn't taken until today. Now, when it comes to Peter Dutton is so relentlessly negative that he's even now bagging things that aren't happening, right? And this is bordering on the pathological when it comes to his negativity. And to describe people of the calibre of Stephen Kennedy and Jenny Wilkinson, who have advised both sides of politics in a frank and fearless and impeccable way, as somehow tainted, It's not those two that are tainted. You know, we won't be taking lectures about the public service from the party of robo-debt, for example. And so I say about Jenny Wilkinson and Stephen Kennedy, this is the best of all worlds. We get Michele Bullock at the Reserve Bank, and we get Stephen Kennedy at the Treasury, and we get Jenny Wilkinson at Finance. I couldn't have more respect for Kennedy and Wilkinson and Bullock. We've got those three in the key positions, and that's a really good outcome.
Pretty happy Treasurer to have the best of all worlds. Let's bring in Cassandra Goldie from the Australian Council of Social Service and David Alexander from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome to you both. Cass, let me go to you first. What's your reaction to today's announcement?
Well, David, of course, we want to congratulate Michele Bullock for her appointment. It is historic, and obviously she has depth of experience with her service at the bank. I think the critical question, of course, is what will happen now to the approach of the bank as a whole. And we certainly believe we do need to see a reset from the traditional approach, which had all been about focusing on the inflation target. And in our view, we've got, again, a big risk that if we only focus on the inflation target and we don't have a strong view about driving down and keeping down unemployment as low as we can make it, genuine full employment, we won't see a difference to the lives of people we represent, those who are most at risk to what could happen over the future here with the economy and with job losses and in the face of these cost of living pressures. So it's a really historic day. We do congratulate Michele on this appointment, and we really want to work very closely with the bank and with the government because for people out there who are on the very lowest incomes, this is a really important set of policies that will directly affect their lives.
It is, of course, Cass, meant to be a dual target of fighting inflation and achieving full employment. Are you saying Philip Lowe put too much weight on fighting inflation, and are you suggesting that Michele Bullock, as Governor, should put less of a focus on fighting inflation?
Well, look, it was well known. We had urged the bank on several occasions to not be, pursuing further rate rises in the face of what we saw as the big risk to people losing their jobs. I mean, if we settle on a 4.5% target in terms of unemployment, that means, Doug, we're going to see job losses in the order of about 150,000, and that's 150,000 people. We don't think that is the right approach, and we've written to the Treasurer to express our views about the approach to full employment. We look forward to working with the government and with the new Reserve Bank Governor and the people at the bank so we get this balance set right. The worst thing that can happen to you when you're facing a cost of living crisis is you lose your job. I mean, jobs are so important for people. We know that. The government has said, and we welcome it, a strong focus on full employment is critical. So we now need to work very hard on getting a better setting of that a full employment target. We think that it should be much lower in the 2.3% range, not 4.5%. And we certainly think this single focus on an inflation target is not the right approach. And so we've been clear about that in the lead up to the Reserve Bank review. We welcome the review. We do have a real opportunity to now implement that review with a genuine resetting of the balance between the focus on employment and interest rates.
And look, I should note that Philip Lowe, as Governor, has often said that he's taking a slower approach to bringing inflation down than other countries because he wants to protect those employment gains. David Alexander, let me bring you in on the big question here, the decision to replace Philip Lowe. Is it the right one?
Yeah, well, the Chamber welcomes the appointment of Michele Bullock as the next Governor of the Reserve Bank. She's a fine economist in her own right with enormous experience, and so we think that's a very strong appointment by the government. She has an enormous task ahead of her. At any time, the Reserve Bank would be a difficult thing to manage. They're trying to engineer a slowdown in the economy without crashing it. Then they've got this review on the top of that with many changes, a change to the very structure of monetary policy operations, which means that managing that process is going to be critical as well. But she's very well placed to oversee it. She's been there in the heart of it for a long time.
What about Philip Lowe, though? Are you pleased he's being replaced or disappointed?
Well, Philip Lowe is a fine civil servant, and I think he did his job with diligence and class act. I think you mentioned in the way he has dealt with this process, and so obviously he himself recognises that he made a mistake with the forward guidance to 2024, suggesting that interest rates wouldn't go up, and that was an error. He was dealing with, a major economic upheaval through the COVID era, which is unprecedented, extraordinary. So you have to cut a bit of slack for that episode for every policymaker because they're flying blind. They really didn't know what was going to happen. There were some very dire forecasts out there. So,
what about more recently, the 12 rate rises over the last 14 months? Clearly, as we heard from Cassandra, there's a view that too much emphasis has been placed on fighting inflation rather than keeping unemployment low. Do you share that view, or do you think it's justified what the Reserve Bank's done under his watch over the last 14 months?
Yeah, I think the Reserve Bank is very worried about inflation getting out of hand. So it shot up, but there's a great danger of it becoming embedded over time, and that would be the worst possible outcome. So he's been trying to engineer a reduction in inflation, but not too hard and fast. So it's a difficult thing to do. He's got to jack up rates to do it. Many businesses are hurting too. The same rate rises that are impacting the general community, businesses themselves, many of them are struggling under that. But the Reserve Bank is trying to get better medium and long-term outcomes with some regrettable short-term pain.
So, to cut to the chase, Cass, would you say that the new governor, Michele Bullock, should not be lifting rates any further?
Well, I think it's about resetting the policy and frameworks around the role of the Reserve Bank and monetary policy, and of course the role of government and fiscal policy. I think one of the real challenges for the Reserve Bank has been that we don't think there's been enough action on fiscal policy to deal with inflation. For example, rent regulations, getting on top of energy pricing, for example. So it is very important that the independence of each, part of the, in terms of the government setting fiscal policy and the Reserve Bank on monetary policy.
Sure, but for the Reserve Bank, do you think that they should stop with the rate rises?
We have absolutely said that. We have cautioned against further rate rises. I don't think that we've seen the rate rises that are already now locked in flow through. We haven't seen the full effect of those yet. And of course, we're very worried that we're already seeing a ticking up of, the risk on unemployment. And we've got to work very hard now, I think, with the agreement that's being developed between the government and the bank to make sure that the commitment to properly balancing the risk of unemployment with the risk of inflation is properly reset.
Okay.
And I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, and a final one to you, David Alexander. Do you think the government has scapegoated Philip Lowe?
I think that Phil Lowe, he made that forward guidance error, which did leave him vulnerable to not being reappointed. It's not an expectation or a usual normal thing that there is a reappointment. Some of our recent ones have been.
Has he been scapegoated?
I don't see it in terms of scapegoating. I just think that there were those errors, and so the government is looking to renew, and so that's where it's come to.
David Alexander, Cassandra Goldie, thank you both for joining us with your reaction on this news today. Well, the questions that many may well be asking right now is having a different person in the RBA governor's chair actually going to change how the bank is operating? And is this decision, the government's saying they're not happy with how the Reserve Bank's been ratcheting up interest rates lately? The Treasurer was quick to point out earlier the decision has nothing to do with the decisions the Reserve Bank has made over the course of the last few years.
This is genuinely about who is best placed to take the Reserve Bank forward into the future. But we know, the government knows, that Australians are under the pump right now. The primary focus of this government are the cost of living pressures that people confront. And we take responsibility for our part of easing the pressure on people, providing cost of living help without making this inflation challenge worse. And Governor Lowe, to his credit, has pointed out on a number of occasions that our budget is taking the pressure off inflation rather than adding to those inflationary pressures. That is our primary focus.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers. I want to bring in political reporter, my colleague Matt Doran. Matt, we haven't yet seen reaction from the opposition to the announcement. We heard plenty, though, over the last 24 hours from Peter Dutton and others in the coalition, including this morning with this line that I was just putting to David Alexander, that Phil Lowe is being scapegoated. So would you expect there would be criticism from the opposition now? And what do you make of the line they're treading on this issue?
I think there's 2 points. First instance, we may well see a position, regardless of how much the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are saying that Peter Dutton's comments had nothing to do with their decision. And, you know, it may well have had nothing to do with their decision, but it does allow Peter Dutton to stand up sometime later today or perhaps over the weekend and say, here we go, they've listened to me, I've given them some sound economic management advice. Of course, that's how politics is played. Yep. We all know that. Aside from that, though, it does allow the government to say, right, we're keeping someone who's got deep institutional knowledge of the RBA, who's been sitting around that board table when these decisions have been made over the last couple of months, and we're now putting her in charge of the bank. So they can say that there's stability, or was that line from Veep, wasn't it? Continuity with change. So it's a bit of a double-edged scenario there that the government is now presented with. And certainly, I mean, we're going to see that sort of line being run by the opposition later today, I'm sure.
And I suppose the only point of criticism when it comes to Michele Bullock will be whether, or question will be whether she can deliver that sort of change, having spent a lifetime, a career, 40 years at the Reserve Bank, given the review identified the need for change to how the bank operates internally, and that's going to be the challenge for her.
Yeah, institutional knowledge, but also some would argue maybe institutionalised in that respect. So how do you shift that up? That is going to be a challenge for her.
All right, Matt Doran, thank you very much for that. No doubt we will have a lot more reaction to all of this throughout the rest of today, but we'll leave it there.